All right, guys, we're back with another Seeing Through Gebser. I hope you guys are excited because I'm very excited today because as amazing as the first 366 pages of this book are, and we are on page 367 in this series, this edition, I should say, we are on Manifestations of the Aperspectival World, the Natural Sciences. So we're going to be talking about mathematics and physics. So for the rest of the book, or at least for the rest of the next section, which is going to take a while, we're going to be going through the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the arts. And we're going to be discussing how essentially 4D rationality has manifested and how it's a transcendence of 3D rationality, as we've talked about in this book. Now, before we get right into it, we are diving into the deep end today. Very excited. I hope you brought your thinking caps today. I have made a huge mistake. I have led you guys astray. I touched on this in my last Kill Rationalism video, the difference between the 4D sphere and the 3D sphere, which I touched on in this series, I think a video or two ago. It's not that it's necessarily bad. It's just I've made a mistake describing time. So the way I used to describe it was time was an integrating medium, or time was a medium that integrates and generates. It integrates spatial aspects and then generates some sort of quality. Wrong. That is wrong. I have made a huge mistake. I have refined my view. I went past the surface. It's not that it's entirely wrong, but I went past the surface, but I didn't go quite deep enough. I didn't quite get it. So this is what time actually is. Please forego any statements you heard 2 weeks ago about what time is, and listen to this. 2 weeks ago, Justin was an idiot. Justin now is smarter than 2 weeks ago, Justin. This is what time is. Ready? Time is an invisible, dimensional backdrop that allows spatial objects and phenomena to manifest and unfold. And in doing so, it confers order, meaning, and significance onto those spatial phenomena and creates a more holistic space-time integral perception. That is what time is. Time is the stage, as the rest of this book is going to show, and spatial phenomena and objects are the actors. You would not have the actors without the stage. And the stage means nothing without the actors, okay? Space and time. Space-time. Drop the integrating medium thing that I said 2 weeks ago. Drop that shit, all right? Now, it is still true that time integrates, and we're going to get into that. So, insofar as the 4D sphere is, that's still more or less true, okay? So remember the points, that's our spatial phenomena, and the connecting bars, that's time. That is still true. It's not wrong. I've just had to refine the way I describe it, because the way I describe it it was okay, but it wasn't perfect. And I always want it to be perfect for you guys, so I apologize. Please let me know in the comments if you want me to just respond to you and just break it down very clearly. I will take the time, and I will do that for you. I apologize for setting you guys astray, and let's get into it. Now, we're going to be talking about mathematics and physics today. Now, of course, this is not going to be this is going to take more than one video. I apologize if I take water breaks. I just went on a run in like 40-degree weather. My treadmill broke, which is awesome. So, excuse me if I take some breaks. All right, let's get into it, because it's going to take forever if we don't. Mathematics and physics. Reading Gebser now. In the following chapters, we shall venture to verify the basic undercurrent in the various sciences, which is an expression of the occurring mutation. In this, it will be apparent that certain new modes of observation and their results are all based on a conscious or unconscious predominance of the theme of time. Within the sciences, there is surely nothing so vexing, and nothing which encounters more objections than an investigation of specialized results by a writer, quote, outside the field, unquote. So if you watched my sort of discussion or interview with Adam from the Unthink Me channel, Adam, you are the man if you're watching this, he asked me why I thought Gebser wasn't as popular as perhaps he should be, and this was one of the reasons I said, the problem with over-specialization is that you essentially don't listen to anyone outside of that specialization, which does have a certain logic to it, and to a large extent, to like 98%, it's probably true and it's probably right. But unfortunately, you cut off guys like Gebser who have that ability to take that next leap and to view things truly from the bird's eye, and you dismiss that because he's not a specialist. And I like how you put outside the field in quotes. You know he's heard that like 1,000 times. Like, okay, you're outside the field. I don't care what you have to say. Only too readily is he accused of the philosophical exploitation of results in whose discovery he has not participated. That is brilliant, and that is a problem with you philosophers out there. I hate to say this, but nothing deconstructs the validity of philosophy or the universal truth of philosophy more than philosophers in modern day. All you guys go in, invade someone else's subject, misunderstand it because you're using rationality and your philosophy as a tool of your ego and not using it to illuminate the world. You're using it to obscure it so you can just cram your philosophy down everyone's throat and pretend you've got it all figured out universally. It's not going to happen. Yet the attempt made on these pages is not the philosophical interpretation of specific scientific results. It is not even the attempt at a synthesis, nor does it result from a subjective opinion or predilection. Both its basis and its valuations differ since they have to do with consciousness. Our criterion is not philosophical but etiological. We are not attempting an interpretation but an imparting of truth, syneresis, not synthesis. This is to say that our criterion is based on the making evident of what is real, the volition of those things which reveal or impart their truth and become perceptible in truth because of an intensified consciousness. So what he's saying is four-dimensional truths, rendering transparent, truth that awares over you after you have rendered the world transparent. If we apply this to our investigation, it means that we are making visible and examining the various new modes of observation, as well as the results of the specialized sciences and the arts which parallel each other as parallel symptoms, and thus as manifestations of new consciousness. It also means that we are observing and making them evident as temporic attempts towards superseding three-dimensionality and its inherent compulsion to employ a systematic terminology. So we're not doing 3D philosophical stuff, so don't tell me, oh, well, you're just trying to philosophically interpret. No, that's not what we're doing. That's 3D stuff. We're in the 4D world. If you want to deconstruct it, come to our world, then deconstruct it. Because we've deconstructed yours. We understand your mode of thought better than you do, so drop this arrogance. Once again, we mention deliberately that our interpretation of the specialized results of the sciences is not an attempt to capitalize on these results. It is rather an inventory which purports to evince the basic theme of our epoch, and is the signature, as it were, of the mutation of consciousness now occurring. The signature that is giving its stamp, negative or positive, to all significant manifestation of our epoch. Also, we're going to get into some good stuff in this video today, so I hope you're ready and excited. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. He says, this attempt will be construed as a philosophical misinterpretation only by those who are unable to extricate themselves from the straitjacket of rationality or specialization. Only those persons who are not up to the challenge of the quote-unquote new energy as a result of their rational impoverishment will, in their attendant confusion and lack of insight into their atrophied irrational component, accuse us of mystification and irrationality where we are already at work in the realm of the irrational. I talked about this in my Kill Rationalism videos. If you are being irrational, do not ever let these people tell you that you are being irrational. Ever. We must never forget that criticism in a given instance is primarily a criticism of ourselves and not of others. So why does he say that? So I think it's possible. He doesn't really expand on this, which is frustrating. So he's kind of leaving me in the dark to grasp at straws. So when I criticize a rationalist for displaying rationalism, and I think in a way that's destructive, guess what? I was a former rationalist, and I have those rationalist capacities within me. So in many ways, when I'm criticizing him, I'm kind of criticizing myself, not only in the past, but also in the present, insofar as I have that potential. I haven't acted on it in this moment, but in a moment of anger or whatever, or maybe bias, maybe I will. And I'm sure I will, because I'm a human being. I think that's what he's getting at. He doesn't expand on this, which is frustrating. By ignoring this simple fact, or it could be, Actually, it's probably that, but what it probably is, he's probably referencing a Jungian psychological integrating of the shadow. So when someone does something that pisses me off, no, it's actually your fault, because you are the one who's been on the earth for 28 years, and you can't wrap your mind around the idea that someone might do something that's normally frustrating. You need to integrate your shadow, so anytime someone does something that would evoke anger, you can be the mature adult and say, no, I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to be a normal human being who's virtuous, who's intelligent, who's rational even, and do the right thing. So when you're criticizing others, no, you're criticizing yourself for allowing for that person's actions to bother you. You're criticizing yourself for not taking in the time and putting in the effort to do the proper integration of the shadow and live a better life, something that I personally could work on myself. So don't think I'm coming down from the mountains here. By ignoring this simple fact, which frequently happens today precisely because of its simplicity, many people are led unintentionally to become traitors to themselves. Yet the same fact can be of inestimable worth to someone with an open mind. Yeah, there you go. Our criterion, then, is not philosophical. We're still in the process of interpreting in the philosophy world. Our criterion is the evident fact of consciousness mutation, and our examination of the various specialized scientific and artistic results is made only with reference to this mutation, since these results are the visible manifestations of the emerging aperspectival and integral consciousness. This point of clarification should be constantly borne in mind during the course of our remaining presentation. Let us now turn to these manifestations. As we might expect, they are particularly evident in the fundamental discipline of all the exact sciences, mathematics. It is no accident that we have had to deal with it so often in both parts of our presentation and have already brought out the most important aspects. During the heyday of the Baroque era in the 17th century, an age which also attempted to get beyond the perspectival strictures of Renaissance space and the arts, there was a, quote, downright frenzied forward thrust in mathematics, of which Calaris speaks. Now remember, we've already kind of covered this with the 3D Euclidean axioms, Euclid's postulates. Remember, all right angles must equal 90 degrees, two parallel lines will never meet, truly parallel lines, that even if it's point one intersecting, they'll meet at some point, but truly parallel lines will never meet. That's 3D Euclidean geometry, which is great, by the way. It's not everything, but it is great, and that was a transcendence of the preceding 2D geometry, if you want to call it that, which is just this sort of... It's essentially what alchemy was to chemistry, just the geometry version. But then Euclid, being rational-based, said, no, we can figure this out. We posit space and time as absolute backdrops, and then he discovers the vanishing points, which is to say the laws of 3D geometry, the ones I just mentioned with the straight lines, triangles composed of three lines that intersect, blah, 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 blah. So that's 3D as a transcendence of 2D, and then, of course, we've already covered in this series the non-Euclidean geometries, which we're about to recap again very slightly, but we are transcending Euclid's 3D postulates, because remember, and I feel the need to repeat this because we cover so much in this book, and it can be a lot to kind of get in your head. So sometimes you have to be repetitive. Remember, the way that Euclid's 3D vanishing points were transcended was we realized that Euclid posited space as an absolute backdrop. That's not true. Space is curved. So this idea that two perfectly parallel lines will never meet, even that is not true, because remember, space is curved, even if it's just a little bit. So curved space with time as an absolute backdrop is one way of mathematics transcending Euclid's 3D postulates. Now, of course, they need to take into account time as an integrating phenomena, but we'll see if that happens. The traditional and predominantly static geometry of measurements set down by Euclid is displaced after a nearly 2,000-year exclusive reign by Descartes. Analytic geometry by 1637 by philosophers, I'm sorry. Desargues. Desargues apostrophe. Just do that, okay? Projective geometry based on perception and illustration rather than on measurement. So, of course, as he just said, Euclid's static geometry, that should be a dead giveaway. Based on measurement, that should be a dead giveaway that we're in the 3D rational world. And now projective geometry is based on illustration and perception rather than measurement. So we are transcending here. And illustration and perception is in accordance, as we're about to find, with the invisibility of the new physics, the new discoveries of the new physics, and by the dynamic mathematics of Galileo and Newton. Projective geometry, in particular, engendered to a greater degree than the others the modern quote-unquote non-Euclidean geometries, which brought into being the fourth dimension that Einstein introduced into physics in the form of time. That's mental time. These new mathematical concepts, moreover, were the foundation on which, for the first time, modern technology could be developed. So, remember, the steam engine and all this stuff, all the new energy of the new understanding of time in our consciousness, because we're rationalists, we channeled that towards spatial technology that transcended space in a quick amount of time. That's our understanding of time. It's just a chronological linear time. That obviously signals a four-dimensionality, and then there's a four-dimensionality because of this mathematics, as he just said, as we just covered the transcendence of the static measurement geometry, and that wouldn't have been possible. The technological advancements wouldn't have been possible without this four-dimensional mathematics. So we can see the integrating function here. It's beautiful. And we can see that different domains. In this case, it's a discipline. In another one, it's the revolution. Or in this case, it's a discipline of math. The other, it's a discipline of like technology specifically. Even by themselves, and there are other parallel phenomena which are familiar to every mathematician, these facts are a clear indication of the, quote, eruption of time, unquote, into mathematical thinking. They elicit a wealth of phenomena of which foremost, the technologizing and four-dimensionalizing of our world, speak an unambiguous language. For this reason, it is unnecessary to examine at length the revolutionary and genial achievements of the Queen of the Sciences, apart from noting the set theory of Spicer, the quote, probability theory which today has undergone an unheard of refinement and is progressing ever further into all of the sciences on its triumphal march, and is about to remodel the classic world image dominated by laws into a static world image. So the laws, of course, as we all know, is a vanishing point. That's being transcended into a statistic world image. Interesting. In which there is no certainty, but only degrees of probability. Well, not even going to say anything. And the axiomatic system of David Hilbert, whose axiomatics permit, quote, all types of geometries to be clarified in their structure as well as in their limitations, unquote, and demonstrates, quote, why geometries like the Euclidean, the non-Euclidean, and others are possible without being contradictory, unquote. A proof also of the validity of the various consciousness structures which are represented by the various geometries. So, we are moving on. We are transcending into 4D geometry, not your 3D stuff. Yet already the perceptive Caleres noted the dangers in the wake of set theory, as well as the postulated, quote, statistical world conception, unquote, and the, quote, hyperlogization of mathematics, unquote, by Hilbert. So Caleres warned us about something. All present-day attempts to realize the new perception of the world are exposed to the danger of a regression into reinvigorated consciousness structures, particularly during the process of realization before the new consciousness is consolidated. We know this for a fact because we covered this in our fourth dimension series. All these people were trying to figure out the fourth dimension, and what did we get? We got a regression back into the magic with, I think it was Matterlink, and then we got a regression back into the mythical with Mach, then we got a regression into the mental with Einstein. So you have to be careful. The reinvigorated structures are not immediately recognized for what they are because those who are realizing the new perception lack insight into the constancy and the continuing presence of the forgotten consciousness structure. So I was about to make this point, but I realized he's going to make this more clearly than I will. the reason why this happens at all is because you are ignorant to the fact that the magic and mythical are always active. And because you threw them in the broom closet and just pretended they didn't affect you, even though they did, what happens is once they come out of the broom closet, they're new to you. So you conflate them with the newness of integral consciousness. That's a bad problem. Thus, there is nothing gratuitous about Claris's warning that mathematics must not get mired in mere logistics and assume that it is, quote, the ultimate recourse of a completed logistic mathematical cosmos, unquote, since, quote, this definitely magical view contradicts the facts of history, unquote. His warning is indeed necessary, for it is not heeded. The realization already achieved would again be placed into question. So when he says warning that mathematics is the ultimate recourse of a completed logistic mathematical cosmos, that doesn't sound integral to me. That sounds like everything is being unified into mathematics. That sounds like the magic structure. So, no, we're not doing that. Integral doesn't try to subsume all into one, like the philosophers do, or the mathematicians do, or whoever does, the mythologists, whatever. This is the problem. You take one little specialized section, and then you say, this is everything. No, we recognize the simultaneous presence and efficaciousness of all, and we recognize that all belong to an integral whole of complements, and our division of them is only a product of the mind. Where are we at? The warning also points to the emerging struggle taking place among the most prominent representatives of this science and elsewhere who are attempting to grasp and consolidate something which is apparently not yet evident in its full clarity. Skip the next paragraph. Since no other science today enjoys the status or even credence accorded it by the general public as the exacting research in physics, we would do well to give preference to its results. Nothing has had such a profound effect on the attitudes of the 20th century and has altered them so markedly as certain new concepts elaborated by this science. The various theories of relativity by Einstein, as well as the quantum theory of Planck, have altered our perceptions and estimations of the world in a manner comparable only to the changes wrought in earlier, less mentalized ages by the great men of wisdom. The statements and assertions of these men of wisdom, not verifiable by experiment or calculation, are no longer believed as they once were. Our credibility today is directed at those men who, with their invisible mathematical formulae, which are neither calculable nor verifiable by the vast majority, are leading the new perception of our world in its conquest of the public awareness. This already touches on an important characteristic of the new physics. Its findings and their articulation are expressed in a non-visualizable form, although not as abstractions. This change in particular has enabled physics to supersede mere three-dimensionality. As we all know, rationality is born from the discovery of perspectivity, which privileges the eye. The eye obviously is related to what is visible. If we are transcending 3D, we must necessarily go to the invisible. I don't see how you could do otherwise. Or better yet, recognize the invisible backdrop that allows the visible to come into being and to have order and meaning in all these things. That's a big point, by the way. A lot of the new physics, as we're about to touch on, is invisible but not abstract. The supersession of three-dimensionality is the decisive aspect. The incorporation of quote-unquote time into three-dimensional space altered this space, thereby altering the structure of our reality. This structural alteration in particular is an expression and visible manifestation of the change which our consciousness is undergoing by mutation. Listen to this. The mechanistic world image of classical physics, valid until 1900, has been, in the words of C.F. von Weizsäcker, so that when he says the mechanistic, to be clear, that's the 3D rational, causal, mechanical way of viewing the world, where everything conforms to the vanishing points, everything is measurable, everything is causal, that's a big point. No. As C.F. von Weizsäcker, who I believe discovered quantum logic, is going to make clear for us. Quote, classical physics has been more thoroughly destroyed than one would have expected. This is not a misfortune, but rather a good lesson. An image of the world is more than a mere scientific theory. It must encompass, at least symbolically, the whole of reality. From the standpoint of individually verifiable phenomena, This whole is invariably a matter of faith, a belief which is a precondition for our lives. The old world image of classical physics, too, attempted to represent the whole, but as its means were inadequate and necessarily failed to do so. Yet physics was the first of the natural sciences to possess a self-contained system, and therefore had the role of a showpiece, as it were, among the sciences, independent of the image of world. Perhaps this role now devolves on physics in a new sense, for the new physics is the first self-contained system of knowledge about nature, comprehensible in exact mathematical terms beyond the confines of the mechanistic worldview. Pretty cool, huh? I don't know why I'm coughing so much. What are the distinguishing characteristics? This is Gebser now. What are the distinguishing characteristics of the new quote-unquote physical worldview? We must first observe that we can no longer speak of a quote-unquote view of the world in physics, but rather of a perception of the world. Moreover, even the so-called mechanistic worldview was not an image of the world, but a conceptualization. It is an essential component of the new perception of the world in physics that it is no longer conceptualizable. Interesting. Obviously, concept belong to 3D mental. We're transcending that. But this is anticipating our discussion. Let us first inquire carefully into the data or givens as a result of the most recent revolutionary discoveries and theories. In doing so, we find that they evidence clear indications of what we have called the aperspectival world. We can discern in recent physical research in conceptual form the new components which we have demonstrated to be characteristic of the new mutation of consciousness. Fancy way of saying these next 3 points I'm about to give you are manifestations of the aperspectival world. These are the signals that communicate that we are in a new world, my friend. We have discovered a new dimension. Those points are, number 1, we find, for example, that in physics, number 1, quote-unquote time is taken into consideration for the first time, and the mere concept of time is superseded. So, number 1, we have time in all of its forms, even non-consciously, is being taken into account. It's not just space, but now we're integrating the temporal factor. By the way, study these 3 points, because not every single one of them is going to align to these, but you're going to hear a lot of these frequently. Number 2, the same holds true of the overstrained rational dualism. So not only are we transcending mere rational time, we're transcending rational dualism. And 3, reality is shown to be no longer adequately and exclusively realized by means of mental conceptualization and empirical visualization. So 3 points. If you need to go back and do it again, that's fine. But the good news is he's going to go over one by one, so it's not a big deal. Let us restrict ourselves to these 3 points as they indicate consequences that will be immediately evident from the following discussion. Our task is, in the first place, to examine the data established by physics, and in the second, to determine their latent tendencies. These tendencies are obvious because we have been able to show their basic import. They are in part seedlings and in part already exfoliating manifestations of the new structure of consciousness. The discovery of a relationship, which is significant or meaningful rather than sensible, between new and initially confusing concepts and a mutation occurring in human consciousness sheds new light on these unsettling and contradictory results of scientific research. Let us now examine the 3 points mentioned above, noting first the data and then determining in each instance the tendencies inherent in them. First, the theme of time, which has been shown to be very much in the forefront, is also predominant in physics. The primary role of the time concept in Einstein's theory, that's another thing. We should know that time is obvious in physics. It's obvious. Einstein unified space and time. Obviously, if you can't do that if you have no radar for time. So that should be number 1 between Einstein and Planck's quantum mechanics. Then this is time in physics. We're going to explain it in detail, but that's it right there. That's how time is being discovered in physics. The primary role of the time concept in Einstein's theory of relativity has been noted on the preceding pages and examined in detail in our study of the transformation of the Occident. As Raymond Jouve, emphasizes the consideration of time, specifically of chronological time as the fourth dimension, is tantamount to a discovery of time. This discovery was prepared and precipitated by what we have called the eruption of time. So the eruption of time into our consciousness, applied to physics, is the discovery of time that Einstein did, which is mental time. Of course, that's not real time, or at the very least, it's one way of viewing time. We have seen that the genial deed of Einstein was his liberation of quote-unquote time from the state of mere abstraction and, to a certain extent, from its rationalization, since it now became a quote-unquote relative element within a worldview that no longer represented a merely static world, but turned this world into a flux, transforming it into the recently conceived space-time continuum. This change is manifestly evident. In place of the classical system of a spatial world, there is now the space-time world as a continuum. So, I'll repeat for emphasis, but it's very obvious that this change is manifestly evident. In the place of a classical system of a spatial world, there is now the space-time world. That should be very obvious that we've discovered time here. These are the given data. The tendencies or trends visible in them are by nature fundamental if we consider them as expressions of the incipient new consciousness. These given facts leave no doubt that the eruption of time into the most empirical of all the sciences is accompanied by the awakening consciousness or discovery, not only of the concept of time, but also of time as a world constituent. Remember the stage and the actor. Time is a world constituent. That's its integrating functionality. The invisible dimensional backdrop that allows space to come into existence and to unfold, and as such it is a world constituent, space-time. And this discovery of necessity gradually gives rise to a completely new conception of the time factor, new at least with respect to our mental consciousness, in terms of nature, our image of the world, and our ways of thought. The decisive step in this direction came as a result of Planck's quantum theory. His demonstration that nature does make leaps, as the saying goes, effectively demolishes our prevailing view of time. Nature does not make leaps because everything unfolds according to the step-by-step chronological, according to the rationalist, way of doing things. Everything is simple, one after the other, everything is more or less equal. But thanks to Planck's quantum of action, or Planck's quantum mechanics, we know that no, these moments are not equal. Remember, each new moment is both quantitatively distinct from other moments and qualitatively insofar as it has a different scale of energy than the moment that preceded it and the one that will proceed it. This is quantum mechanics. Life unfolds moment to moment, not the straight flat line chronological time, where everything is constant. There are laws and things are deterministic. That's just simply not true. I don't know what to say. Nature makes leaps. Our world is not constructed continuously, or with respect to time as a constant, as the mechanistic view of classical physics had held, but rather discontinuously and unpredictably. Planck also discovered the agent of this discontinuity. Planck also discovered the agent of this discontinuity, the new physical constant, the H, or Planck's constant, the so-called quantum of action, which we're about to explain, which together with the, quote, dimension of action, unquote, is a universal constant. I would explain now, but I'm going to do it after the next few paragraphs. So Planck discovered, he's a brilliant man. Quantum mechanics, insofar as the world is just these discrete energy packets, one after the other, as I just explained, and this universal constant that is a static element that we're going to get into why. These are the given facts. Where do they lead? First, there is the consequence that time is not a quantity, a linear, constant, and causally determinate, but sui generis, an intensity. So time is not just an extensity, an intensity. Or you could say it's not an extensity at all, and it becomes an extensity when we view it as such, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is an intensity. This implies that a perception from physics reveals the complexity of what had been hidden of what had been hidden, quote-unquote, behind the mere concept of time. There can be no doubt that we are justified in relating the quantum of action to the time complex, although it runs counter to the three-dimensional terminology. This justification is based on our distinction between systatic elements and systematic quantities or magnitudes. So, of course, 3D would never be able to conjoin space and time because it requires the space between space and time to exist to function at all. So, I don't care about your little objections. We're not doing that. We're not, I don't know what to say. We're doing something else. As an indirect corroboration of our positions, we can cite a remark by Ernst Zimmer. Speaking of Planck's quantum of action, or H, Zimmer observes that it, quote, seems to be a quantity with a higher degree of reality than most of the other quantities employed in physics. And this is not all. For Zimmer also maintains, in terms drawn from physics, that, quote, in the quantum of action, we have a quantity which is measured in space and time, unquote, in which time is understood as physical measurable time, and also that, quote, the theory of relativity teaches us that we can arrive at a generally valid insight only if we do not view events as divided into space and time, but rather observe the four-dimensional world constructed of space and time. The action, Planck's quantum of action, being a part of the four-dimensional world of thought is a universally valid property in contrast to energy, which Zimmer defines as a spatial magnitude. It is not something visible, like everything that can be divided up into space and time, for it belongs instead to a deeper and more inclusive region of truth. Therefore, Planck's insight that it must be understood in atomistic terms is a perception which touches on the most profound previous knowledge in physics. So it belongs to a deeper, more inclusive region of truth because we are penetrating the external spatial surface and finding the temporal dimensional backdrop that renders us a more holistic integral perception that allows space to come into being. Unquote. We must not forget that we are dealing here with the realm of physical research and must accordingly refrain from superimposing, even to a slight degree, its results and formulations onto other areas. Yet even if we remain strictly, though not dogmatically, within the framework of physics, Zimmer's definition, which Planck himself recognized as relevant, presents us with three statements which deserve closer attention. It's very, very, very important, okay? Because we're about to get into the manifestation here. Very important. First, that the quantum of action is a universal magnitude with a dimension of action or effectuality, universal, not static and not partial, like everything rational. It's universal, which is in line with integral, because integrate has to integrate all, right? Integral integrates all. Rational divides into parts. This is universal, Planck's quantum of action. That's number one. Second, that it possesses a higher degree of reality and belongs to a deeper, more inclusive realm of truth. Third, that the action or effect has an atomic structure, a point made not only by Zimmer, but also by Heisenberg, who speaks of the, quote, atomic structure of energy, unquote, a concept of structure which in both instances dispenses with any visible demonstrability and, quote unquote, grasps the, quote unquote, material phenomena only in mathematical terms. We already talked about this. We are transcending the 3D rational stuff, so now we are doing 4D invisible stuff. It's not abstract. It's not a concept. It's there. We can only express it through mathematical formula. It's invisible. That's transcending the 3D. I apologize for being repetitive. I just want to get this in your head. It is not only symptomatic that we find here the terms dimension, truth, and structure, getting used to that. It is equally symptomatic that the discovery of the quantum of action, which includes its dimension of action or effect, opens up a more profound or higher region of truth and is ultimately universal and amaterial in structure. In principle, it should be noted here that any new truth, reality, or structure, whether of a more profound or a higher form, is always accessible only via a new dimension. Each of these new forms is overdetermined with respect to the one which, quote-unquote, underlies it. In the sense, both the it as well as the h overdetermine the strictly three-dimensional structure. I, in each case being, in mathematical terms, the square root of -1, the imaginary number, which reveals the next and higher dimensional coordinate system. We kind of already talked about that. We will return in the next section to the concept of structure, which is here stated in preliminary form in A-material terms in physics. As for the definition of action or effect as a dimension, so Gebser's going to try to describe, don't worry, because I'll give my own little description at the end of this, Planck's quantum of action, what it does specifically. As for the definition of action or effect as a dimension, we can consider it to be a systatic element. Planck's quantum of action, Planck's H, is a systatic element. We will explain. This is not to imply that we are postulating the quantum of action as a fourth dimension, so it's not time itself, because if it was time itself, it wouldn't be a systatic element. A systatic element is an entity or thing that conjoins space and time, or reconjoins space and time into the integral whole. If it was time, it wouldn't be that medium of integration, right? It would be time, the fourth dimension. But if we consider it as a systatic element, since it is a potential effective factor which is manifest and quote-unquote comprehensible only spatio-temporally, that is four-dimensionally, it has a systatic relationship to time as the fourth dimension. So there you go. At least to the extent of being a physical structural element of primordial efficacy, the Planck constant H is that quote-unquote dimension which requires for its self-manifestation the it dimension, spatial world, of Einstein on the one hand, and intensifies or surpasses the four-dimensionality of the space-time continuum on the other. So, what is Planck's quantum of action? Seriously, it is an invisible agent that proportionally binds energy, which is a spatial magnitude, to frequency, which is time. It is an invisible agent that proportionally binds energy, which is space, and binds it to frequency, which is a form of temporal sequencing or unfolding. So we have space and time. Rationally, these are separate. How do they reconjoin? The universal constant action H, which conjoins these two. There you go. It's a systatic element. We're not in space and time, we're in space-time. Planck's quantum of action has made that clear. That is what Planck's quantum of action is. It is the universal constant that perpetually integrates and conjoins space and time in the way described. I hope that was simple enough. I almost don't even want to explain it anymore because I don't want to confuse you guys. I think you've got it right there. It's fine. So there you go. There's a systatic element in physics. We are not in the three-dimensional world anymore. We're in the four-dimensional world. The ultimate consequence here is the dawning of the universal, and therefore integral, possibility of the fourth dimension. To what extent physics will be able to comprehend the H as an intensity of the extensity it, I'm going to repeat that. To what extent physics will be able to comprehend the H, Planck's quantum of action, which I just described, as an intensity of the extensity it, the material world, will depend largely on the mathematical possibilities which are beyond the ken of the author. So this is the great thing about Gebser. He's not trying to start a cult. He's not trying to bang your wife. He's not trying to steal your money, all right? He'll just tell you, I don't know. And he'll be the first one to tell you. It would take a lifetime of dedication to this to figure out the mathematical formula. And even then, I might not be able to do it because everyone's not equal at all things. Some people are better at math than others. So that's the great thing about Gebser. Now, with Rudolf Steiner, who I love to death, he's responsible for the sort of spiritual cosmology I follow. John David Ebert, that is, of course, warned me about him. He said, look, as great as Steiner is, you need to be very careful because there are three words, there's a succession of three words that you will never hear come out of Rudolf Steiner's mouth, and that is, I don't know. He has an answer for literally everything. You always have to be careful about those guys because those guys are trying to start a religion. They will never tell you, I don't know. They are trying to start a religion. So, great thing about Gebser is he's not trying to do that. Beautiful. It is definitely not possible to relate H to it as long as they are understood as categorical quantities, and as long as no means of expressing their acategoricality is found. All right. Do I want to keep going here? Yeah, let's keep going. The discovery of such a relation could be facilitated by the not insignificant fact that even with respect to physics, the possibility of the fourth dimension is revealed, which we have described as its essence. the fact that it is achronic, that is, time-free and therefore also space-free, since, as we know, spatial temporal phenomena cannot be dissected in a four-dimensional or syneretic perception into space and time. The fact to which we are alluding is this. So not only are we time-free, because we're out of the exclusive bounds of mental time, but if we're time-free, then we must necessarily be space-free. Now, how is that possible? Listen to this. The fact that we are alluding to is this. In microphysics, the quantum exchange of energy occurs in the realm of the so-called elemental particles. Among them are the electrons, of which Planck has written, quote, according to Heisenberg's law, which forms one basis of wave mechanics, the location of an electron having a specific velocity is completely indeterminate. So the fact that an electron has a specific velocity is now indeterminate. Why is it indeterminate? Not just in the sense that it is impossible to determine the location of such an electron, of such an electron. So not only is it impossible to say, okay, well, we know the electron's there, we just don't know where it is. So it's indeterminate in that sense. Think of it like, if you've read Blood Meridian, at the very end, the kid in the outhouse, we know he's in there, but we don't know what's happened to him, right? So we know it's that kind of indeterminate. We know where he is and that he's here, or we know that he's here, we just don't know where he is, right? He's saying it's not just indeterminate in that sense, but listen to this. But in the sense that the electron does not occupy a specific location at all. It doesn't exist in space at all. This is because a simple periodic material wave corresponds to an electron of a particular velocity, time, and such a wave has neither a spatial nor a temporal limit. Otherwise, it would not be periodic. The electron, therefore, has no specific location, or, if you will, it is simultaneously found in all loci. So that's space-free, my friend. Pretty cool stuff. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend I understand this science stuff on a super deep level, so unfortunately, I don't have too much to add. The new physics also shows signs of a definitely new and novel conception of time, or, more correctly, a new valuation or estimation of time. This new estimation applies to the view held today that the world is finite. The principle that the world is finite, yet unbounded, is one of the axioms of Einstein's theory of relativity. Interesting. So finite, of course, should signal time. There's some time temporal element being played here. Hello, space-time. Give me one sec. Oh, my goodness. This is interesting, by the way. We're going to end on this. This is fascinating. And Christians, if you're watching, you're going to like this. This finitude applies to its spatial as well as its temporal component in conformity with the space-time continuum for which it was discovered. The most recent investigations, as reported by Pascual Jordan among others, show that the universe is barely 10 billion years old. Other physicists, such as Arthur March, estimate longer spans of time on the order of 20 to 100 billion years, while still others assume shorter time spans. Hoyle estimates 5 billion years, C.F. von Weizsäcker 2.5 to 3 billion years. Lecomte de Nouet, fuck the French, a span of 2 billion just for our solar system and 5 billion for the universe as a whole. Now listen to how Gebser reads this. All of these represent the view that the world came into existence sometime. So the world itself was brought into being not through time, at a particular moment, emphasis on the time, and exactly that, at a moment, whether it was 2 billion, 3 billion, or 100 billion years ago. It came into being at a time. So time allowed it to come into being and conferred order onto it, as we're about to see. It came to be in space and time, or better, space and time came to existence with it. Incidentally, the Christian notion of creation once again gains currency by this particular aspect of the new physics. So, of course, God created the world in time through the Genesis story, which, by the way, if you want to hear more about that, go watch my Jesus Christ and Rationality Seeing the World Integrally video. We talked about this. We talked a little bit about Genesis. Jesus Christ created the world at a particular point. Let's say it was 10 billion years ago, 100 billion years ago. It doesn't really matter. It came into a being at one point and not another. Hello, time. Where other spiritual cosmologies and cosmogonies said, no, the world is infinite. It's always been here. It just simply defies our our way of doing things. That was like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Indians had this way. There was a lot of other spiritual practices at the time that said, no, the world is infinite. We are the finite ones. They are infinite. Gebser and the scientists, it seems, and Jesus say no, it came into being at a particular time, and when that world came into being, space and time as dimensions came into being with it, lending credence to the Christian cosmogony. Cosmogony is a fancy mythological word for a myth about the origin of the universe. And the Samyutta Nikaya contains a statement of Buddha that corresponds to a great extent with Einstein's formulation. Quote, "Do not think that the world is eternal, for it is not eternal. It is without an end, unbounded. It is finite, i.e., temporally limited and not eternal or infinite. That is time. Infinite destroys time. It completely, there is no time. It's almost like a timeless magical thing going on. It's not what it is. Pretty cool, I think." The age of the universe and of the earth belonging to it, which has been scientifically ascertained listen to this, has been ascertained in various ways, is relevant to our discussion inasmuch as it proves that the quote-unquote state that we have described as, quote, pre-space timelessness, unquote, to be real. C.F. von Weizsäcker has described this quote-unquote state, noting that we can assume today that the world actually has an age. Quote, "Before this time, the world, if it existed at all, must have been in a totally different state from its present day one. We cannot even try to depict that state, since the very use of a concept such as time does not arise." What does that sound like? Hold on, unquote. Gebser. If we, however, realize this timeless state with our consciousness, then the state is transformed into space-time freedom, which is with respect to consciousness not only the most profound reality and truth, but also the amaterial and atemporal basic structure of the universe, which, to the extent that we can penetrate it with our consciousness, is free of matter as well as time. For that which we call space-time freedom is nothing more than that quote-unquote state which lies before magic space-timelessness, of which we have become conscious, as we have repeatedly stated on these pages. So the state of pre-state timelessness, the state of spiritual whole in which all dimensions, all things in this world come from or derive from, origin and consciousness. It's not just in here. It's out here too. That's the state. Whatever state the world was in, it was pre-space, pre-time, and pre-space-time. Same thing with conscious, same thing with origin, because once we become aware of space and time, and once we awaken space-time freedom, we've awakened time freedom, space freedom, which is to say we are in that state of origin before space and time came into being. Fuck me. Pretty cool, huh? So origin, not only does it have consciousness structure evidence or proof, or whatever you want to call it, it has physical, the immaterial state that is before space and time, that is our consciousness, that allowed our consciousness to come to being and determine our consciousness as the state it is, has physical evidence as well. And I think that's where we'll stop today. So I love you guys. Hope you guys learned anything. Hope you guys are excited, because this is more or less what we're going to be continuing for the rest of the book, or at least for the next 200 or so pages. Yeah, I mean, maybe a little less than that, but yeah, we'll say 150, 160. So love you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys soon. Love you.